Phyllis?
6 minutes. 6 seconds. 6 seconds.
6. All right. Here we go. All right. We'll call to order a special meeting of the Town of Superior Planning Commission. Phyllis, could you take roll, please?
Chairperson Jim Sawtelle.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Robert Momartz.
Here.
Commissioners Phyllis Sarden here. Bob McCool.
Here.
Jerry Melia.
Here.
Jason Reese.
Here.
Lisa Ritchie. Anthony Stewart.
Here.
Steve Whitty.
Here.
Planner Stephen Williams.
Here.
Attorney Hillary Green.
All right, thanks. First item is public comment on the consent agenda or non-agenda items. I don't think we have any public members here to comment, so we'll move on from that. Next item is the consent agenda and approval of the minutes of the August 1 and August 15, 2017 meetings. Did everybody get a copy of the well, let's just go with the August 1st meetings. Did everybody get a copy? Did anybody have any changes?
No changes.
No changes, not me. Nope.
All right, can we have the motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Momartz, second.
Second.
Commissioner Malia, all those in favor? Motion's carried. And the August, what's the other one? August 15, 2017 minutes? I wasn't here, so anybody have any changes to that?
No.
Nope.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Reese?
I'll second.
Commissioner Stewart, all those in favor? I'll abstain. Okay, next item is discussion of the Northwest Superior Sub-Area Community Engagement Project. Stephen, take it away.
I will pretty much just announce our consultant, Clarion Associates, is here tonight to kind of go over, I guess, their broad scope of how they plan to approach this and to get feedback from the Planning Commission. It's evident by our minutes from August that we haven't met in a while. So since that time, we went forward and solicited, or had a bid for this process, and Clarion was awarded that contract. And they have kind of a tentative outline, or not so tentative, but a fairly kind of consistent with what you guys provided direction on, that we wanted to get this done in the last quarter of this year. So we'll go over that kind of time frame. We've already set up some of the community meetings, or the community meetings, I should say. But the kind of the outline for circling back and having discussion with you, and what the questions are going to be asked to the community and to the residents, as well as what we want to send out on an online type of survey to get feedback, or questionnaire, to get feedback from the public. So I will turn it over to Darcy, and we'll have a dialogue.
Great. Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Darcy White with Clarion Associates. We were part of the comprehensive plan update for the Town of Superior 5 years ago, which Martin and I were just saying, it feels like a long time ago, but it also feels like it's gone really, really fast. So I'm happy to be working with the town again, and I'm excited to get started on this process. So as Stephen said, we are just getting started. We know this is kind of a time is of the essence process, so wanted to take time to get some feedback from all of you, talk a little bit about the process, but do want to kind of give you guys a preview of, at least so far, what we've assembled working with staff to kind of frame the discussion and get some feedback from you before we go out to the public in the next couple of weeks. And then we want to spend the last part of our time with you just kind of helping think through. We've got some specific questions for you in terms of what you hope to get out of this process, but also kind of specific questions that we want to ask the community. So we want to spend, it'll probably take 10 minutes to kind of run through some of the background. I'll give you the high level piece, and then we'll obviously spend more time with the community. But in terms of the overall process, as Stephen noted, given the timing of the holidays and all of those things, we did go ahead and try to get some meetings on the calendar. Those have been advertised. So we've got 3 separate meetings scheduled for later this month. We've got 2 evening meetings, one in Original Superior, one at the fire station, kind of geared more towards the community at large. And then we've got a separate kind of more stakeholder-oriented meeting scheduled for lunchtime on one of those days to kind of target the business community. That's more of a invited kind of focus group more than the community at large. So trying to get as broad a range of perspectives as we can on this area, and also want to make sure that we provide an opportunity for folks to weigh in online. I know working on the comp plan, that was a really effective way for folks who just can't make it to a meeting to kind of provide some feedback. So we will have online opportunity as well as kind of a hard copy questionnaire that can be distributed just to try to get as many folks as possible to weigh in. And so we will make the online and the hard copy available after our meetings. We tend to do that just to try to get folks to come in person if we can, and then give them the opportunity after that. So we'll have that available for 2 weeks following the meetings in October, and then we'll take some time to synthesize all of that, bring it back to all of you with some recommendations. And we're anticipating there's probably a variety of options, as you would expect, in terms of maybe how you guys might think about approaching this area in the future. So we'll kind of give that some thought based on what we hear, and bring you some options for discussion in November. So we'll talk about specific dates here at the end, but just wanted to give you kind of high-level overview here. Based on that kind of November meeting with you guys, we'll take some time to refine those recommendations, and then go back to the town board in January is the plan with your recommendation at that time. And then from there, kind of see where it takes us in terms of whether there is direction to move forward with a separate process or not. So in terms of context, I think, certainly having spent time here before working with the community and kind of seeing, on one hand, it feels like not much has changed, but I think the sense we had is that a lot has changed. And I think that's part of framing this discussion is helping people kind of understand, what's really driving this conversation, what are the things we need to be aware of as a community that are really kind of happening around us and within the community itself that we need to consider and kind of be proactive in responding to. So wanted to give folks a little bit of background on some of your current plans and regulations. Obviously, you guys are very familiar with all of this, but I think just, kind of helping people understand the role of the comp plan as your overall vision document. That's a 20-year plan. Again, you're 5 years into that, but a lot's changed. And so we did spend a fair amount of time during that process, and several of you I know were involved in that, talking about these specific opportunity areas in the community. So Superior is unique in kind of the context you have with Rock Creek and kind of very limited land for development, and kind of that has advantages and challenges at the same time. Also want to mention to folks that the comp plan does talk about the protection of character in original Superior, and that was a big part of the conversation that we had with the community back in 2011, 2012. It does also acknowledge that ultimately you may want to consider and anticipate the transition of the Superior marketplace, kind of parts of that or the whole area into more of a transit-oriented development over time. Kind of it was predating some of the US 36 improvements, but knew that was coming and kind of flagged that. However, there isn't a lot of guidance in there for the town about how that would shake out. So that's something that as part of our discussion today, I think is kind of maybe a gap as you guys start to think about how that plays out over time. Also want to give folks a little bit of background on kind of what's allowed in Northwest Superior today. Help people understand, PUDs, the Planned Development District has really kind of been, one of the predominant tools that's been used for some of the more recent developments in Original Town, and kind of walk them through some of those recent developments that have happened. And then also talk about some of the base zone districts that you have. And obviously, a good portion of the residential, not all of it, in Original Superior is the RL district. And, it's a pretty basic single-family detached district. There were some tools developed before the marketplace, the Residential Character Streets district, kind of anticipating some of those kind of transitions and character protection issues. However, this has never been used, and so this is sort of an obsolete tool really at this point that exists in your code today. So it seems like you've got some protections there, but there really aren't a whole lot of tools to use to kind of get at some of those residential kind of compatibility considerations. Looking at the multi-family options, the medium density residential, there's kind of three main areas. The Second Avenue property, has been a big point of discussion over the last year. There's been a number of ideas that have been floated for that property that have yet to move forward, but some different concepts. Some that were planned development options, others that were using the base zone districts. So that's one of the largest opportunity areas left in Original Town that hasn't been developed. And then you've got a couple other parcels that are a little more uncertain in terms of timing of when they might come online or if they'll come online. So the number 2, the Superior West Edition, kind of right on the west side of Original Town, is one of those that it sounds like there's been some more recent kind of activity in terms of assemblages and interest in potential development versus the one on the far west side that hasn't seen a lot of activity. But there are some areas that are likely to experience some change over the next 5 to 10 years, I would say. And then also looking at some of the non-residential in Original Town. So there are several light industrial sites that are existing, some that are likely to change and some that are not. So the CDOT maintenance facility, it sounds like there's some discussions with the town about maybe having some of your public works facility kind of, yard options there. The Superior West Edition, another site kind of north of that multifamily site, the RM site, where there's also some changes that are likely to occur. So that's a little bit of a remnant from Original Town, kind of before Founders Park and some of those areas. And then you've got some other kind of spot pieces of the gas station and some of the storage facilities. So kind of a range of uses allowed and kind of essentially the zoning reflects, in most cases, what's existing today. The transportation plan is a relatively recently updated. This was kind of partially underway when we were working on the comprehensive plan update. There was follow-up work that was done, so this really does get into a lot of detail, and a lot of those recommendations in the transportation plan have actually been implemented since it was updated in 2014. So a lot of the 36 improvements and some of the future connections, I know, have been a big part of the conversation over to the east, and thinking about the trail connections as well. So just kind of giving a little bit of background on some of those connections. I know the concept of linking the different parts of the community together was a big part of the community discussion back in 2011, 2012. I think the sense that you had Original Town and Northwest Superior kind of function a little bit as a standalone part of the community, and so this idea of bringing the different parts of the community together was something that the community really was in favor of, and a lot of that has happened through those trail connections and other improvements that are reflected in the transportation plan. So shifting gears a little bit to talk about what's happened since 2012, since the comprehensive plan was updated, and I think you start to break down some of the specific development activity, and there's a fair amount. You've got new Coal Creek Crossing, you've got the Maple Street homes, Guardian Storage, another proposal if it does move forward for the Second Avenue property. And then looking at, I think when we were finishing up the comp plan, Downtown Superior was still kind of in discussions in terms of finalizing that project, and still vacant ground. So I think the fact that all of the infrastructure has been put into place, that's coming out of the ground. Those are some serious changes that really influence this northwest part of the community. There's also been significant activity that the town has initiated on the capital improvement end of things. So looking at a variety of improvements, Founders Park was completed, Coal Creek Drive, there were changes to the Coal Creek Channel improvements, new bridge, a whole host of improvements that have been made in Northwest Superior since 2012. And there's a lot more on the comprehensive list that we have, but this just gives a little bit of a flavor. Also, the changes to McCaslin. The diverging diamond is new. I mean, it's really pretty remarkable when you start to kind of tick through the changes. The roundabout is now open, and you've got other improvements happening. So all of those connections, kind of north-south as well as east-west within the community, are starting to come together. And then thinking a little bit more broadly in terms of what's happening around the town, the regional projects have really kind of changed the character of the US 36 corridor. I think you guys are probably as relieved as everyone that the construction has finally ceased on US 36 for a while, and that those improvements have really changed the way that operates. And I think that's a real opportunity for the town of Superior in terms of your place in the region in terms of access. And so having the new lanes, having bus rapid transit access is kind of a game changer for communities to kind of connect to other parts of the region, particularly where you've got folks who are working in different parts of the region and want to be able to access those areas efficiently. The dedicated bikeway is also a huge amenity that you have easy access to that you didn't have just 5 years ago. And then lastly, in the last year, the town initiated and was fortunate to be part of a ULI study. So the Urban Land Institute conducts what they call a technical advisory panel, so a TAP study. And the town requested support on this study. Many of you are probably familiar with this, I'm sure, looking at future opportunities for the Superior marketplace. And so thinking about the new access that you do have to the bus rapid transit and how this area could transition, what could the town do to really help plan ahead for and think about, those longer term opportunities. And, I think if you think about transit-oriented development within the broader region, it's really evolved in many of these areas over the past 20 years. So cases where maybe the light rail opened or a bus rapid transit station opened, those things take time, but the thing that's consistent in all of those cases is that the communities really were proactive in thinking about those long-term opportunities and really kind of trying to anticipate that. So that you could be out front in terms of, what do you want to see, what's going to be best for your community. And they're all very different. I think, density tends to be a common theme that we hear when we talk about transit-oriented development, but some are very residentially oriented, others have a lot of commercial. Those are all the things that, you kind of need to look at on a community-by-community basis and think about, particularly in the context of your new downtown. Similar development patterns, but how do you kind of get those two to complement each other if you choose to go down that path? So recommendations from this study really, I think were supportive of that concept of looking at and trying to plan ahead for the long term for this area. And what the long term means, I think is hard to define, but I think it's certainly beneficial to start having those conversations now and kind of taking a proactive approach, similar to what the town did with the downtown. And lastly, in terms of context, I think is just, again, thinking about the broader region. And even though your population as a town has grown relatively modestly, you're in 2016 just shy of 13,000 people. And, the original projections, as of 5 years ago or so from Dr. Cog were projecting kind of about 15,000. So you haven't reached that prior projection yet, but the potential for growth is certainly higher now that the downtown is coming online. You've got about up to 1,400 units potential in the downtown. So just in that area is a pretty big change potentially in a population your size. So something to consider, and recognizing that all around you is going to continue to grow, and that's going to have influences on kind of demands for services, and as the communities really interplay and kind of play off of each other, those are things that will affect you even if your population grows a little bit more slowly. So that's kind of it in terms of the context, and I think really wanted to kind of focus on I think 3 questions tonight, and I think I'm going to shift the order on these now that we've kind of gone through this context, and I think start with the last one while it's fresh in your mind. And if you had to kind of go out tomorrow and kind of explain this process to the community, is there anything else you would want them to know? Is there additional information we should provide? Is this about the right level of detail in terms of what you were kind of expecting in terms of maybe some context for the community? Any thoughts on that?
Thanks, Darcy. Does anybody want to
Was
chime
that the
in?
level, you mean the level of detail you just want?
Yep.
Okay.
Bob, go ahead.
Sure. I guess my gut reaction, 2 gut reactions. One, I don't want to overwhelm the public, but I don't think that's nearly enough information
Okay.
to be talking about this area. I don't think it identifies the potential for the amount of growth that could happen in this area without thoughtfulness. My other gut reaction is there's 2 ways to, well, there are lots of ways to talk about an area. You can talk about it from the perspective of how do we want to see this develop. But you can also talk about it from how do we want to see this not develop.
Mm-hmm.
Is this area capable of handling the volume of people that could potentially exist here? And if not, what changes would have to be made to accommodate it if we want to go there? And a lot of this has been, I've driven a lot of this because I live in this area, and there's mixed reactions. We don't know what people want. I know what I'd kind of like to see, I think, but my wife and I even differ in what we think, right? And so the idea with this process, at least in my head, was people need to understand what our comprehensive plan, our land use code, which is totally missing from this discussion, and that's probably the most important document, what our land use code in Original Town actually permits, right? So you mentioned those Maple Street homes.
Mm-hmm.
Those Maple Street homes could exist on every parcel in this neighborhood if somebody wanted to start putting them up, right? People need to hear that. They need to know that that's what that's a maximum build. We've been using that as an example because it's pretty close to a maximum build, if not a maximum build. There's a lot of infill spots in Original Town that could be developed. Heck, even the small storage units, the Kuffner properties, any of that has the potential to change over time, right? If it's
Mm-hmm.
worth it for somebody to do it. And so I'd like people to understand what not even the possibilities. I think that's the wrong word. Understand what is permitted to happen today and what things are on the table, like the transit-oriented development plan. That is a document in town that I'll bet you most people don't even know exists. They don't know what it means. I'm not even sure I know what it means. I do know it could potentially bring a lot of people into an area at RTD. I don't know whether that's 100 people or 1,000 people or 5,000 people. I've sort of put 500 to 1,000 in my head if they threw apartments out there. And then you start to wonder, how are we going to get people out of this neighborhood? We have one exit out of this neighborhood. That's it. And that context, to me, that's what people need to understand before we can actually have a conversation about what do you want to do. We've had lots of conversations about what we can do, but most of the time, until something comes forward, nobody reacts because they didn't realize you could do that. So, and I don't know how you do this. That's why we hired you and are hoping, and I'm excited, very excited for Clarion to be doing this. But I really want people to understand what could happen and what they're permitted to do now.
So one clarification, that's helpful to hear. I think it almost seems like maybe what you're asking for is to be more explicit about, number of, I mean, sort of how many acres of land do we have? And just sort of, I mean, there would be rough calculations, but potentially kind of a range of, and that can be scary for people, but that would.
Well, and I've done that. I mean, I've counted all the empty
Okay.
parcels. I've sat there in every parcel in original town. I know how many apartments, what's multifamily. I mean, a lot of people didn't even realize that the Kuffner property is multifamily. And the industrial IL zoning is zoned to permit multifamily by right. There's streets that aren't built. There's alleyways that have been taken in the past that aren't alleys anymore, that people may have thought were alleys, but people have taken possession of those properties, or put those alleyways. There's all kinds of things that can happen, and I think we all need to understand that so we can talk about what we want. And if what we want, there's lots of places it can go, and I want to be careful not to, necessarily drive. I mean, we have a big planning commission here that we've had lots of discussions, and there are lots of cool things that this area could be, but I think the people who live here need to understand what can be done, and then once they're educated on that, help formulate a plan to figure out what we want, including modifying the land use code, not just a comprehensive plan, because there isn't a person in this neighborhood that believes that a comprehensive plan is a meaningful document. Most of us don't, because it's a guiding document and we don't honor it. We're development reactive. Developer comes, we react. We don't say, nope, that doesn't meet our comprehensive plan. Figure something else out and come back and talk to us when when you've read our comprehensive plan, you're going to honor it. We don't do that. So it takes land use code changes too, I think, in order to at least for the original town area, for one. But you have that land use code, now you have a base document for what you're going to permit, even when a PD comes forward, because that's generally where we start. So.
Okay.
So those are
That's
some of my
helpful.
thoughts. But.
Other thoughts?
Anyone else? Anthony?
Well, I haven't quite formulated my thought yet. One of the things that came up for me initially was
Microphone. Thank you.
one of the things that came up initially for me was looking back at that plan, and one of the things that we talked about specifically in this commission was not necessarily looking to the past to guide us into the future, but looking at what opportunities we have now and what we can put in front of the people of our town. So that's one of the things that came up for me. And then I'm going to piggyback on Bob a little bit, because what I'm thinking that I might like to hear is and you touched on this, is something more explicit, more specific about what can be done, what direction we can go in with this. I think we have a pretty good understanding of what our zoning is for a lot of these areas and for a lot of these lots, but I think that there might be some concern that the current zoning laws are a little bit too flexible and allow too much freeway for developers to come in and put in there what they'd like to put in, and I don't think that we want to see that. We want to have some say about that.
Okay.
So that's kind of my initial thoughts on that. But thank you for coming. I really appreciated the presentation, and in terms of the information that you provided, I think that it's good for a lot of people to see that and see it together in one place, as opposed to having to go and compile it from our website. So.
Anybody else? Jason? No?
I've got a comment.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I'll piggyback off of Commissioner McCool's comments, because Commissioner McCool is a resident of Original Town, and he's very passionate about it. And he initially brought this up to everybody, and I think has spearheaded this campaign from the get-go with the support of the board. of the rest of the planning commissioners. We all heard you and we all agree. We need to focus on Original Town and the larger scope of things in Original Town, the BRT over there by 36. It needs our attention. Your presentation made me smile because I was a part of some of those decisions, and I was very proud of what the town's become. And so how you identified all those changes and improvements to the town was very impressive, so it made me smile. But I think to agree with Commissioner McCool, I think it's too large and too broad. I think the focus that we're looking at is more on the ground. It's more focused on residential aspects, land use codes, what was done in the comprehensive plan, and bringing that to the residents and saying, of this, what do you want to see Original Town become, Northwest Superior, to include the businesses and everybody. So I think it was a little great overview, but I think the actual thing needs to be more focused. It needs to be more residential, more lower. That was a very wide spectrum view.
Well, it sounds like this is
I think
really helpful feedback. I think just you guys have been talking about this, I know, for a long time. So this is helpful. And I think kind of a couple things I take away from that. I mean, just sort of, we were trying not to steer the conversation too much, but it sounds like just a framing slide up front to talk about, there's a lot of different perspectives in this area. And, we're going to talk about some pretty different places in the community, and, that there might be different ways that you can go to address these different, questions that you have. But
like
kind of what you've heard so far wasn't necessarily part of this and needs to be, it sounds
sure.
like.
So one of the things I know that was on our minds about Original Town was keeping Original Town, the residential aspect of Original Town, very residential, and having some sort of being able to delineate between the residential areas and the business areas. You bring up the BRT to some Original Town residents or some Northwest Superior folks, they might not understand what you're talking about at all. And some of the residents in Original Town may say, well, the BRT is way over there. How is that going to affect us? And so it kind of throws off their focus to answer questions of what they would want to see done in their neighborhood.
Okay.
Anyone else? Bob?
Just add that I think we have to take into account these opportunities, for want of a better word. Things are changing, and what can we do for Old Town to help them deal with the change, and/or how do you maximize the benefit of it? So I think we've got to come prepared with some specifics and some details as to what the impact of BRT would be in a practical sense, as well as sort of numbers.
Okay.
Can I come back a little more?
Yeah, sure, Bob.
And I deeply appreciate the concern about Original Town, because and different people have different ideas what it should be. And I've tried to steer a lot of this to Northwest Superior as well, and not just Old Town, but there are a lot of issues that Old Town are facing. How we want to deal with them, I think, that is up to the residents. But the area as a whole, as Commissioner Maya alluded to, you've got the BRT, the transit-oriented development over there, and how does it impact Original Town? But in reality, how does it actually impact this area in general? Can we actually handle something like that in this area? I'm as interested in a very comfortable flow into our regional shopping district that's enjoyable to come into, that allows you to get in, allows you to park, allows you to shop, allows you to get out. And people are getting, and into town center too, right? We're dealing with this same intersection here at McCaslin and Marshall, and it's this area of town has the potential to become a real pain in the butt to be in. It's not yet. It's not too bad. There's some fighting going on when you come across a diagonal to get into this one lane to turn into our, that's a prime example, right? The people who are annoyed and they get over in the middle lane and then they cut in, and right, that's but they shouldn't have to, right? You should have two lanes coming in. That seems obvious to me now, right? But I'd like to see this to be very comfortable to be in from a commercial standpoint, that people don't want to come into the neighborhood to get, this cut through. That's one of our bugaboos on our street. It's more convenient and enjoyable to take the right way in to the commercial areas, not the residential streets into the commercial areas, and vice versa. That there's a nice way out of the residential areas, so that we're not terribly, not overly inconvenienced by. You're going to be some by the commercial development, but that it's reasonable for us to get in and out, and just be thoughtful. And then, we're already dealing with that a little bit now. So this has the potential to increase, potentially 100%, double in size, number of people, amount of traffic, cars, and everything else. And just how are we going to deal with that if that's where we end up going? Or do we say, no, this area is good, and we're not going to let RTD come in here. We're going to change. We're not going to permit, so we only have a couple open parcels to. We're not going to allow them to zone to bring in, 1,500 people. We have some zoning we have to deal with that we will have to permit when they come forward. But where we have control, are we going to control that to where they can't, or are we going to build it so they can, right? And if we're going to build it so they can, then I really just want to see this whole area, downtown Superior, original town, northwest Superior, just flow nicely. Bikes, pedestrians, cars, just so it's just enjoyable, right, for us to be in. I want my neighbors to come down and walk through town and bike through town, and don't drive down the street. No, I'm just kidding. But just make it a really comfortable place to be, right? That's my thoughts. Oh, sorry, I did have one more thing. I had this different vision a vision of what I thought these meetings might look like, and I just sort of had this idea that there were stations showing what transit-oriented development looks like. What does infill in the original town look like? What do the empty parcels look like? What does the multifamily zoning look like? What does Rogers Farm look like, right? So that these pieces of things people could get educated on in smaller chunks, right? And be able to ask questions and focus on what they care about, right? They may not be able to consume all of that, all of the possibilities. And then from there, that's the part I don't know how to do, which is how do you have conversations around that? How do you weight what Bob says when he's talking about traffic going by and his house in original town versus somebody up in Sagamore who could care less about the traffic going up Coal Creek by my house, or how Laurel over on the other side of town is just dealing with increased traffic has Marshall Road, right, and how noisy that gets, and our neighbors on the other side of the creek who don't even know what the development of what you call it. We call it Rogers Farm, but it's
Second Avenue.
Second Avenue, right? What happens when streets go through over there, and what's that going to do all of a sudden? Now all of a sudden you're dealing with another couple 100, 300, 400 cars a day going around your neighborhood and moving around, how do you weight, what people's concerns are and turn that into a meaningful plan and code and all that stuff. So that's your job. So.
And we'll be coming back to you with asking for direction. I think, in all fairness, I think our job is to try to listen for those themes and try to present a balanced perspective on what we're hearing. And, obviously we're not doing a scientific survey here, so there's going to need to be some consideration just in terms of where those perspectives are coming from. And I think, we're going into this not thinking there's one answer to this question here. There's a lot of different possibilities, and I think we're just trying to be open to that and hear what the community has to say, what their priorities are. It's helpful to hear where you guys are coming from, and we've got a lot of thinking to do on that before we come back to talk with you. But it's helpful to hear your thoughts on the community process. Are there other specific ideas on that?
Just one other thing I'd like to add. I think that when we start these meetings that you need to say exactly what you said just then, so that the community does feel like they're involved in this. Historically, we've had a lot of issues with our community getting in an uproar when they feel like they're not listened to, or they're not heard, or that things are just moving along too quickly without any input from the people that live here. So, so in addition to what you've presented today, I would suggest just say exactly that we have a foundation that we have in place, but we're looking to make that fresh and to build on that and look at current opportunities.
Thanks, Anthony. Steve, did you have anything you wanted to chime in on?
No, I think I really like the idea, because when I think about this and I look at what you present, I love what you presented, because for someone, I'm new to the Planning Commission, so I learned a lot just from your presentation. So I think being part of the town who doesn't know this all the time, didn't live it, wasn't part of this, it was very informational, so I appreciate that. But also to what Commissioner McCool said, is I think I almost want to see if this was built out the way it's planned, what does that mean? I mean, are we talking another 3,000 people over there and 800 cars a day? And not to scare people, but to give some perspective between we're here and this is where it could be if we just let it stay the way it is. And our goal is to figure out what the town wants and work somewhere in between that. And maybe the town wants it to be built out, and maybe that's reasonable. I'm not sure it is, but again, I don't think we should go in preconceived notion, but to give that perspective to people to say, here's what it could be if we do nothing. And that's why we want you at the meeting, because we want your input so that it doesn't get to this point where it's gridlocked everywhere and we can't enjoy the town anymore. So that's the perspective I would at least like to give people without scaring them, I think.
Thanks, Steve. Just had a couple comments, Darcy. First of all, thank you very much. I was one of the few who had the good fortune of working with all of you back in whatever it was, 2012, when we did the comprehensive plan, and it was great then. And I'm glad that your firm won the RFP, and looking forward to working with you on this one. I'll just kind of piggyback on what Steve mentioned, because I wouldn't be afraid of scaring people. In my business, we call it the parade of horribles. And you start the discussion with, here's the parade of horribles. But now let's work backwards from there. And I'm not trying to suggest that I know how to run a focus group or a community outreach meeting, because I don't. And that's why we need folks like you. But, and I'm not speaking for the commission. This is just me talking. But, my view of it is that a lot of people in our community who don't live in Original Town really don't think a lot about what's it like there. If you don't really have a reason to go there every day, you just, it's out of sight, out of mind. And Commissioner McCool was good enough to arrange a kind of a tour for all of us on a weekend when we first started down this process. And it was eye-opening for me, and I'd been through there several times, but just to see I'll demonstrate why I have no career in politics here. It's just kind of the mishmash of unplanned development that has evolved over time. And to me, it kind of harkened back to the kind of small Midwestern communities that I grew up around, where you might have a small factory next to a cute little bungalow that somebody's living in. And that's just not really, I think, where most people would like to see this develop. They don't want to see it go in that direction. And I think Steve put his finger on it for me, that I think part of our job is to just kind of educate people and say, look, this is how, if we don't do, option A is always just do nothing, right? If we do nothing, here's what it might look like 10 years from now. And then maybe work backwards from there. Now, I'm sorry, I don't mean to micromanage the process, but I'm trying to give you some vision into kind of how I thought. If I was a resident of Original Town, and I hadn't really thought very much about zoning and whatnot, I'd probably want to know from coming to the meeting, where do we stand today? What can we do to shape the future, if anything? And what might this look like if we really get out in front of it? And I mean, I really have to commend our planning commission for taking the initiative here to get out in front of it. I think now's the time to do it before our able staff is inundated with development requests and they're just doing what they are hired to do, which is approve or reject, or, you know, we need to give them some guidance on here's where we think it ought to go. So that's my 2 cents.
Great.
And you had mentioned, you mentioned opportunities, and I don't know how, how you communicate opportunity to people, right? Because it could be many different things, and how you think about it. I don't remember Don's last name.
Elliot?
Yeah, John. Yeah. We heard him speak at the Planning Commissioners Workshop. Just one of the reasons I was so excited when I heard you guys I got this RFP, but to listen to how he thought about, there's a lot of discussion around affordable housing, and he started talking about these old neighborhoods and the things that you can do, and I was like, my eyes were lighting up, like, oh, holy, that'd just be amazing, just things you can put in your code to, even bring in some more people, but keep that funkiness, not end up with, another dozen of the most Maple Street homes, spotted throughout original town, but how to, and protection's a tough word, some people don't want to protect their 800 square foot mining cabin that's got termites all through. There are people are going to want to come in here and build something different, so they might want to add on like we did. We kept a part of the house and we added on to it. We kept it one story. There's things you can do with a code. And listening to him talk about how to maybe keep this neat thing we have in original town, and maybe even provide ways to provide better income to the people who live here, to provide affordable housing, just attain not even technical affordable housing, but just attainable places to live, right? And how do you share those opportunities with people so they understand that you could do this? A lot of people, there are people who are in town. There are people who've left. I know a couple of people who have actually left. One wanted to fix up her garage and move into her garage and rent out her house because she couldn't afford to stay there. But she couldn't. Our code didn't allow for that. There are a lot of people doing it who aren't following the code, but she followed the rules and she sold and moved and went to another area. And figuring out ways to to provide for that, and let me rephrase. That's an opportunity. That how do you communicate that to the residents to see if they would be interested in doing that, right? And I'd love to, and how many different opportunities do you share with people that you can think of that they might want to do or might not want to do, and how many of those do you share, and how do you get people thinking about these things in a meaningful way so that we can talk about it and come up with a plan. So it feels overwhelming, but I don't know if we can do it in 2 or 3 meetings, but
Thanks, Bob. Darcy, would it be helpful for us to turn to these others, or these other 2 points?
That would be great. And we've kind of, I think, a little bit of overlap, but maybe jumping back to that first one in particular,
First
because
one.
you guys have kind of started to touch on some of those.
Anybody want to jump into the deep end on number 1?
kind of already touched on it a little bit. But
Sounds like, I mean,
A
you were
little bit.
talking about ADUs potentially, and I'm reading between the lines on some of your housing. I'm not
go
exactly
ahead,
sure
Jen.
what Don covered with you, but I'm assuming it had to do with sort of just creative ways to,
Yeah, just,
Fit in
multiple,
smaller units and-
multiple units on properties, owner occupied requirements,
Mhm.
carriage houses, garage top, things like that. Changing the number of unrelated family members that can live in a place, and, not, we don't enforce it anyway, is the way he put it. We can't enforce it anyway,
hard to
so
enforce,
just
yeah.
get it out of the code kind of thing. But number one, we touched on a lot. I mean, the Maple Street homes is what drove a lot of my concern about original town. Is nobody really knew what you could do. I don't think anybody had an idea that that's what the maximum thing could be. And,
So talk to me a little bit more, we've heard concerns about that. Help me understand a little bit more. Is it the scale? Is it the,
It is,
what are the
it
specific
is
hot
a
buttons for
two-story
folks?
rectangle
So
consuming one end to the other of the lot with
Mhm.
minimum. I mean, they've just maximized it. So the poor people who live there, I mean, literally,
Yeah.
their top of their roof is below their first story. I mean, these things are maxed at 30, 20, I don't know what our max is, they're probably pretty close. You know, and they were built as duplexes, even though nobody really wants to admit that, they were built that way, so that they could be turned quickly into that. They're just huge, they're just,
Yeah.
So we just didn't realize that you could do that, and it shook a bunch of us up to get up and say, wait a minute, so it's just become an example. It's all legal, it's all fine, it just kind of blew us away.
Well, and sometimes it often
And
takes.
and it's great that it's over on
something
this far side of
happening
town.
for people to realize, yeah, that could happen.
It could have happened right in the middle, right?
More broadly, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, so,
We've also heard kind of concerns about, or not necessarily concerns, but some of the challenges potentially of people who've wanted to do lot splits. Maybe they own a much larger lot. You couldn't, it's not easy to come back in and subdivide that to do more than one unit. Is that something you guys see as a challenge or have perspectives on that?
Yeah.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
I think there's opportunity in original town to subdivide lots and double it.
And provided it was single family, that would be consistent in your minds with what's there, so. If someone were to take a large lot, had met the minimum requirement of 7,000 square feet, put a single family home on, they had
On
one
smaller
house,
lots.
2 more to add to it, that's kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to listening to those ideas. I don't know what the rest of town thinks, right,
Sure.
of that idea. I mean, a lot of people have double lots. I mean, and then I approached Stephen, I was like, okay, what if I want to resplit this lot? Because when we did the addition, it all got, made into one parcel. It's a challenge, right? We have to, a lot of measurements, a lot of thought. Got to go through a request process,
Mhm.
right?
So is it
Yeah.
fair to say maybe there's just, it sounds like just from the concerns you've raised, just a sense that the regulations are maybe not just challenging to use, but a little unpredictable in the minds of the folks who live in original town about what you might see next door. And do you think most folks are aware of, kind of what's allowed or haven't really thought about it, or?
I doubt a lot of people have thought about it, be my thinking. I think when those townhomes go in across the way and forth, people will go, whoa, what's that? Where those come from? I mean, we've been talking about it, so I think they're getting an idea that it's coming. But
Okay.
that whole block turned into multifamily without any thought to Fifth Avenue or, traffic flow for another couple hundred people that could potentially live in that block. If the families decided to sell, it would raise some eyebrows. I'm trying to be careful too, because I don't want to totally insert my thoughts. I have lots of things I could say
Sure.
about what I'd love to see in town, but, I'd like to hear what my neighbors and everybody else is thinking. So.
I'll just say personally, and again, I'm not pretending to speak for the commission here, but, I live in Rock Creek. I think most of us live in Rock Creek. It's, covenant-controlled community. You can't have a blade of grass out of line without getting a nasty gram from the HOA, but there are benefits to that, and it's very nice. It's very aesthetically pleasing when you're walking through there. I think with respect to original town, and maybe people who live there, maybe this is what they want, and if that's the case, then so be it. But you can't help but be struck that. When we did our tour, we were just looking at different things, and I was somewhat dumbfounded that it would be okay to have, a trailer home that's falling apart that clearly is, maybe abandoned, just kind of sitting there, and that's okay. And then, you might have a 2-story concrete, garage with living quarters on top of it, and it just didn't seem to have any sort of continuity. I don't want to foist my will on, or try to, on this area of town. But I think it could be a real gem for the community if folks really get behind it and they say, gee, we want to get out in front of this. We have a vision for what this ought to look like, going forward. you know, it could be just a really coveted part of the community, given the proximity to downtown and everything else, or it could continue to kind of just be a very eclectic, you know, type of community that sort of evolved over the course of 100+ years, and I think that's where, really, to my way of thinking, that's what got us to where we are today, because we thought we ought to get community feedback, we ought to find out what everybody wants to do, but the more we reflected on it, I think the more we arrived at the conclusion that, I mean, you can tell, I mean, we can't moderate this without introducing our own biases into this, you know, so that's why we need professional help. Anybody else?
I like that you use the word continuity in original town and Superior. I was just thinking of how charming it is to drive through downtown Louisville. There's, 50-year-old bungalows next to brand new construction, and that's 2 stories, the new construction. But somehow they complement each other. Somehow it's still charming and attractive. And there's a lack of continuity in original town and Superior. And I think that's part of what we're trying to accomplish here. We'll see if that's what the residents and the business owners of the town and original town want. With the new construction going on across the street, that has all sorts of our fingerprints all over it. Every commission in the town is all over that. But there's nothing to prevent anyone from building a monstrosity, not that it's going to be attractive or not, or overbuild a lot because they can, because that's what developers will do to maximize the dollar. It's an investment. You have to capitalize on your investment. And if that calls for putting 6 duplexes on very tightly on a lot, then that's what it calls for. If the town allows for it, let's do it. That's where the money is. But is that the right thing to do? Is that what the other residents of the original town want to see? And then it lends to all the extra things of the traffic and the population and the noise and everything that we talked about. So that's why we need professional help.
Well, it's the balance. What do you do with the scrape, right?
Right.
'Cause that's, there are people who are going to live in the homes that they're in for the next 20, 30, 40, 50, who knows how many years, and be quite happy with it. Many of us there have, against Rock Creek, but we don't want a 3,000 square foot home to take care of. It's just not, most of the people there were quite happy in, 900 to 1,900 square feet. There are a few bigger ones, don't get me wrong, but when somebody does come in to build, right, when somebody comes in to do an infill on an open lot, or when somebody decides to buy, the 800 square foot bungalow and scrape it and stick something up, what's going to go there, right? And we're all going to be fine until something goes up that we're like, oh crap, you were allowed to put that next to my house? Wait a minute, that wasn't okay.
Well, that 800 square foot bungalow it's a historic aspect of original town Superior.
It is.
It might not be designated.
Yeah,
but
we don't. I can say I'm pretty sure that most of the neighbors don't want it. I won't. We went through that once before. We can go through it again. But yeah, it's. But you're right. I mean, how do you opportunistically protect that rather than legislatively protect it? Right? How do you encourage people to? I mean, people look at our house and they don't even realize that we've. You can kind of see it now that one of the big trees is down, but there's still a pretty prominent face of the original house that was there. But we've added on to the back of it and sort of maintained that. And other people have done a lot of that, and you see it. Even over the years, even some was done in the 40s and 50s, and I think our garage was built in the 50s or something like that. Long after the house was done, things were moved, and so yeah.
One of the other things that comes to mind for me is that we've spent a lot of time talking about the residential aspect of this plan, and not necessarily much time on the business aspects. For me, this has been an issue for me for a long time. I think that there are too many empty storefronts in the marketplace, and I think that part of this plan might include how to address some of those issues as well, how to get viable businesses in there, because I mean, I think that you'd have to have a balance between the residential and the businesses. And, you know, I think they support each other. If you have viable business in there are going to be people that want to buy houses and live in this area. And, you know, they may share your idea of building a new construction 900 square foot house. You know, they may share that vision. But there has to be that balance. And I think that I think when I look at what's working well in our town and what's not working so well, for me, that's one of the things that's not working so well is that we have difficulty attracting and retaining businesses, and so.
And some of that's a perception issue too, right? Because the owner of that is happy. They've got Costco and Target and Whole Foods, and you know, financially, I think it's very strong. But I haven't heard anybody who thinks that shopping center is doing well.
Yeah.
They all think it has all, you know, and I don't know whether who's the owner now? It's not Brixmor. Who is it now?
Brixmor's
Is
the
it Brixmor
manager
still?
at Central Property Ownings that holds it, so.
Yeah, yeah. So, and how do we work with them? Can we work with them? What does that look like? You know, can we do some things to help them do something that they think would be important to do, right? Not that I want to encourage more people in here, but do they need more people in here, right? Is that necessary? And do they want to change the face of their shopping center in order to make smaller shops work better, right? Or do we find two more huge big boxes and combine the empty ones into, you know, I don't know. I mean, you know.
Well, and that's the point. I
Yeah,
mean, maybe
you're right.
you know, you bring in someone with a small business, maybe they are attracted to living in, you know, Old Town, and maybe not. You just don't know until we start getting those people in here and seeing what they want in terms of the residential piece of our community.
No, that's a really great point, and I think part of why we wanted to have the business community kind of focus group and you know, just to have some of those. I mean, obviously when we meet with folks in Original Superior, we're going to have a very, very specific conversation, and I think we need to have those other conversations as well. So we will definitely try to tease out some of those questions. I think the retail question in general is tricky right now, as you guys can imagine. You know, the whole dynamic of retail is changing, and so I think. You know, ultimately, I think, you know, that's sort of delving into some of the economic issues and kind of strategies. One of our team members on the comp plan, Matt Prosser, who you may remember with, he was actually part of the TAP study that was done last year, so has a, you know, certainly a better understanding than I do of some of the market dynamics there in terms of some of those questions, but we'll definitely try to delve into those as well as part of the framing of this. So,
And I think to make a comment to Commissioner Stewart's item about the retail and the business community, I think the ULI's TAP report addresses that, because I was a part of that study last year as well, and there's a lot of interesting information in there about how to readjust the roads, let's say, and take down some of the buildings and then rebuild some new ones, and what the marketplace would look like in the future. And I think that the TAP report would be a good place to look for answers to that.
So that may become one of those issues that the Planning Commission needs to get behind again and kind of push forward and push on that, because there's evidence that as long as there's not someone pushing, things tend to sit for a while, and you have to get those things moving somehow to light a fire so that it doesn't get lost and become the 2016 TAP survey in 2027 that we're still looking at. So.
well, and it may very well be that there's sort of interim strategies that you guys could look at to kind of help, you know, keep some of those spaces filled in the near term until you're ready to do some of the bigger projects. And so it's probably, you know, a combination of things for sure. But you're right, there's definitely some good stuff in the TAP study. So.
I don't know if part of this process, as you sharing, you're providing guidance to us, is, I mean, if we just have ideas that are dated and don't make sense, I mean, we're going to need to hear that as well, right? You know, I mean, you know, understanding what's working well in communities right now, what things are thriving. I mean, I know I drive around and I see lots of cranes in lots of places. Not here, we have R1, but, you know, so it makes me sit and go, well, what are they doing? What are they building? Why is, you know, why are they thriving? What's, you know, what's, yeah. Yeah, so.
I'm proud
you
of
know,
our little
just-
crane.
We'll put a couple more out here just to attract people to our town, right?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, certainly,
Dan's running over
we
here.
will, we're happy to, you know, and that is part of what we've been asked to do, is provide some of those recommendations. I think, you know, at this stage, we just want to get a handle on where do you want to, you know, what do you want to see and where do you want to go? And we
Yeah.
can kind of help you figure out the best options to maybe pursue, so,
Okay.
absolutely.
Do we give you enough guidance on number one,
I
Darcy?
think so, yeah.
Number 3. We started with number 3.
Yeah, we did 3,
We've
then
been
we did
talking about one a
yeah.
little bit, though, I think, so.
So now we're down to 2, top 2 things. Boy, that's a tough one.
I don't have just 2.
Yeah.
Well, I think-
You guys go.
Well, and I think I mean, you've touched on the educational aspects
I did, yeah.
and kind of wanting to coach people a little bit in terms of at least, you know, what options do we have at a high level to maybe help me understand as a resident what might happen. And so sort of, that's helpful, I think, but love to hear any other specifics.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is going to be getting the maximum input from the community, and how do you drive that? And I don't want to be sitting here, you know, or being in a meeting 10 years down the road and have a bunch of people say, well, I didn't know anything about that. So, you know, outreach to the community is going to be key, and just really pushing. And I don't know how we beg and plead people to provide their input, but you know, that's going to be one of the key things, is to get the engagement from as many people as possible, and not just from original town. I mean, it really needs to be from the entire town.
So in terms of advertising for these events, we've used the town newsletter. What else specifically, Stephen? Social
The
media?
town newsletter that went out on October 2nd or 3rd or whatever it was, 2nd, I believe. And then we've used the chamber extensively to reach out to the business community, but we will be using, and we've already used the website, but we'll continue to use the website, and we will flyer, actually hand deliver up, notices for these meetings, as well as the online surveys, as well as the physical form survey that they can fill out if they don't go online to do it. So
We
that's
put some
the
signs up, like some election signs.
we can. So and we
Remember
will.
we used the sign out front last time, too.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
I
the
don't know if anybody-
electronic message board that
Yeah.
is new, if anyone's noticed. We updated that
Yeah.
about a month ago. It's got colors
Was it
now.
new? Okay.
Yeah.
I
knew it was
It's
working
about the
now.
same size, but it is, firmly in the 21st century.
Still want the banner back across McCaslin, though. That's,
Yeah.
Can we use US 36? Can we use the one on US 36?
As you come up over the hill.
Yeah, so that's the community engagement. And then I guess the only thing, I'm listening to all you guys, and I think that we have two kind of missions here, and the first phase of that mission is the community engagement process. And really, from what I understood in our last 6 months of discussion, was that this first phase was really to decide whether or not we needed a full Northwest sub-area plan. And so I just want to, kind of recouch that for everybody, that's the goal of this, the next 6 to 8 weeks. And then I think what we get into is a lot of this scoping as to what is that going to actually involve once we need it. But I think it's hard to separate the two as well. So what I'm hearing is that we need more specificity, to some degree, but we also don't want to frame the conversation. So it's the same conversation we've had for 6 months, where it is, and that's where we wanted Darcy, because Darcy's very good at this, and so. But that's, so I just want to make sure that everyone's still, I guess, thinking about the fact that this first phase is really just, getting out to the community, making sure that, one, that this is needed. And I think that our conversation makes that seem self-evident. And then two, what will that exercise, what are the things that exercise needs to address? And I guess the other clarification I'd like to make is just that if we do the, doom and gloom kind of worst case scenario, I want to make sure that Planning Commission has an understanding of what can actually happen out there. Like, I'm thinking about it in my head while I'm listening to you guys, and one point of clarification is that the marketplace does not allow any residential development right now. So the TOD is just a study that kind of suggests that, the commercial area over there is dated. I mean, we had a 1997 or a 1997 plan for that, or 1999 plan for that, that has, Bob mentioned it earlier, it's based on big boxes, and 3 of them are really kind of driving and supporting that development. But how sustainable that development is long-term, and it historically has been quite critical. I mean, it is our commercial area. It may not be the only commercial area, 10 years from now, but it has been our only commercial area. So I think that piece, as Commissioner Stewart kind of alluded to, is just as critical to kind of, and that's why the map was drawn as it was drawn. But those things are the push and pulls here. I also hear Commissioner McCool say that, we should explore affordable housing and, maybe some opportunity to, do different things on your lots and some flexibility. And I think that the few members of the public that came to and I think, you brought them into one of the meetings, they talked about how they like how eclectic Original Town is, and that's what they want to preserve. And so I think part of that scoping is to get our arms around what Original Town is, what it looks like. Maybe it's, not quite, I think, and it's also to get around the scope of what it could be if the by right uses, were maximized. So it's a bit of both, but I've also heard that, we're concerned about multifamily housing, and multifamily housing is similar to allowing ADUs, so
Right.
Where do we want to land on those kind of conversations and what's appropriate? So we need to identify as much as we can and give Darcy as much direction as we can as to what are those main kind of questions and what scope. Like traffic's obviously one of them, density in original towns one of them. What kind of uses do we really want to see, and how can we make the marketplace more viable? Do we want to introduce more uses? And then if we do, what is an appropriate density for those uses that will still, minimize the impacts that we have on Original Town? So that's, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's kind of what I'm hearing from
Not to mention
from you
Rogers
guys.
Farm and the 70.
Yeah, exactly. But Rogers Farm, that's
Right.
the context. If you think about what new development can happen in Original Town, Rogers Farm's the obvious one, but you could also take a much broader scope and figure out like how many lots do we really have in Original Town versus how many residents we have. And then if people wanted to, if we did have a lot of scrapes and rebuilds, then how much density would result in Original Town then? So,
Yep.
and then look at it per zone district as like, well, multifamily or medium density would allow for this, this allowance, and then the low density would allow for this allowance, so.
Well, and can we get at some of those questions more broadly, kind of keeping in mind the sort of phasing of this, just by showing some examples, or, even to talk about, marketplace, what the potential could be. I tend to look at, the map, and it's pretty similar in size. I don't know if the acres to, Martin, do you know off the top of your head how compared to downtown Superior?
It's 90 acres, the
Versus-
marketplace, and then the downtown Superior is 157 acres.
So
But
it's a little bigger, but
Yeah.
the scale of development is very similar to what you would be looking at with the TOD. And so trying to put that, just some relatable examples for people of, yes, it's zoned for this today, but, if the town, if the community wants to pursue this concept, you might end up with something kind of a similar feel, walkable, higher density development similar to downtown, and just, kind of maybe just giving some examples, the townhome example of, not necessarily how many you might see, but just that there's potential for more like this, and, are those things that, you want to see or you want to explore, or I don't know if that's a way to kind of get at some of those questions at a higher level. I think we were struggling a little bit with, kind of, we're going out to the community. We're not necessarily asking about vision, but we need to kind of understand a little bit of what their vision is in order to kind of frame a process to get where they want to go. So it is a little bit tricky. And maybe I'll jump to so we had some slightly different questions for the community, and maybe you guys can kind of help us. And, we can certainly provide more context on this, but I think trying to get at that, people talk of, you guys mentioned, we'd like to see more continuity in original town, but as Stephen said, some people like that it's eclectic, and that's what they want to preserve. And so we need to understand the different perspectives. So I think trying to kind of be more neutral in how we were asking the questions. I'm not sure these are the right questions, but
I think those are good, Darcy. If I can just kind of follow up on what Jason commented on, I think if you were to say what's your number one, number two optimal outcome, I think we want to drive citizen engagement and participation. But I would add to that, the qualifier I would say is thoughtful engagement and participation. I mean, we're all kind of old hands at this stuff now, and one of the things I'm consistently struck by is that when we have public hearing on something, we get a fair amount of people who come forward who've really given a lot of thought and analysis to the issue that we're being asked to take up, and we get a lot of people who just kind of come up and shoot from the hip, and it's not really very helpful, and so when I talk about starting with the parade of horribles, it's not intended to scare anybody, but rather to educate, so that folks can kind of have an understanding of why their responses matter, and it can't just be an off the cuff, gee, I'd like to see us put a gold mine up in, original town, something like that. It's got to be something that's doable. So I'm not telling you anything. I know that's your line of work and that's the business you're in. But that, I think, is our challenge.
Okay. I think it's also, in my experience, I think we try to be upfront with people that, and I think part of why we wanted to really talk about the changes around Northwest Superior and within it is that change is going to happen, guys, and you can either kind of sit back and react to it, or you can be proactive. And so I think that's as much for the town as it is for the residents. And so I think we try to be clear about that. I don't think it helps anyone if we try to present a case of we can stop this change, because it's not going to happen. It's happening. And how do you want to respond, and how do you want to kind of be prepared for that? So I'm sure there will be folks who that will be their response is, we'd rather everybody, that nothing changes. But
yeah, we like it how it is right now.
And, I think that's where the question of, what is it that you like? And so what can we control and what can't we control? And that's, I think, what we would try to kind of get out of the conversation, I hope. So
I think you boil it down to where it needs to be right there. What can we control? What can't we control? And in our discussions in the Planning Commission, we've been asking kind of that question: what can we control? What can't we control? How do we want this to look versus having something pressed upon us that we don't necessarily want? And so I think that's, for me, that's key. It's what we have control of. And I think that's one of the biggest questions for me.
Yeah, the balance there is, when I just think about what's around, and we keep falling back to original town, and it's hard not to, just because that's where, everything else is planned, right? They're all structured, but how do you balance? I remember one of our neighbors, Suzanne, coming up many years ago, and this will be totally paraphrased. I'll probably butcher it, but she, we're allowed to do lots of. We're very tolerant of our neighbors and what they can do, right? So complete opposite of Rock Creek, right? If I started a project last summer and I didn't get it done until 2.5 years later, and all my crap's still sitting out there, you're just not going to get a complaint, right? It's just not going to happen, right? And so there's that tolerance there, and she spoke to that, and she put it quite eloquently, which I'm probably not able to do. But I moved in across the street from Dan in 1997 with his house and his junkyard, and it's way cleaner than it was when we moved in and what it looked like over the years. But that was just part of the charm of being there. I mean, I got a trailer cap in there, you know, that I don't need that sitting over there. In fact, it sat across the street on the side of the road for 7 years before it ended up back in the junkyard, right? And so that balance of, you know, what we find, you know, what we're comfortable tolerating and what we're not, right? So then, you know, we have the houses that burnt down over on the other side of town, and I don't have to look at it, but I walk by them and I'm like, God, that just gotta kind of suck for the people who, I mean, that's what I think. I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, they may look at Dan's junkyard and go, what do you want to live there for? Because I'd love living next door to that junkyard, and I love the crane that's standing up, you know, in the view of the mountains. That's just part of life. But there are, you know, where's that balance of what's okay, right? What's okay to do in there and what's not okay? And you were mentioning regulations earlier, you know, and that's a tough. That's a tough thing to balance, you know. Where do we draw the line, and you know what's okay and what's not okay.
Maybe the outcome of all of this, fast forward, 4 months, is the consensus is we don't want to do anything.
Could be.
That might be. I mean, we're open to that. If that's the will of the people, then so be it.
Except, like she was saying, it's not. I mean, a lot of people in original town said that many years ago, just let things be, and that's just not reality, right? The change is going to come, and this is extremely valuable property sitting right on a 36 corridor, and people want in here, right? They want this property, and people sell, and then and then you get Maple Street homes, right? And I do keep picking on them, and Marcel will probably call me on it someday, but I keep picking on that. But that's what's concerning me. That's what I'm afraid of is going to happen. Is a change is going to happen, exactly like you said. People are going to sell. They are going to get out, and things are going to start popping up that we just go, oh crap! Did we mean we didn't really want that? So.
I would probably add to your questions there. What do you like about it? What do you not like? To me, there's a third one: is what's not there that we should add? Kind of the positive. What could enhance? And you say it a little bit in the first one. So again, I don't want to wordsmith it, but it's more the positive of what's missing from here. So.
Okay.
I'd be curious what people think of the marketplace too, right? I mean, it'd be great to know what people think of the marketplace, whether it's a good thing or it's an empty thing, or
Well, at least one people thinks that it's an eyesore with all the empty storefronts. So.
And at one point in time, I heard that was being done intentionally, that they wanted to combine stores. I don't know if that was a reality, that they wanted to combine. They wanted to get some things empty so that they could create some larger storefronts. I don't know if that's true. It's just some rumor thing I heard a few years ago.
But seriously, though, I think that is addressed, though, in the questions that are being asked there. So I just would want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the marketplace in this and focus mainly on the residential aspect.
Yep. We also have one more kind of, I think, getting at kind of what we asked you, which, quickly turned into, there's a lot of, depends on how you look at it, I guess, in terms of the tools. And so Stephen and Martin had talked about just some of the examples that had come up of just try to get people thinking about, those possibilities and sort of, are those flexible aspects that we like or flexible aspects that we might be concerned about if there was a lot more stuff. And so maybe we can, create some visuals to kind of make that a little bit more accessible, but.
Darcy?
Yeah.
I think would be helpful when you make reference, like that previous slide, make reference to the northwest sub-area, that maybe in parentheses or something, how you can identify it's residential as well as commercial. Because people would say, well, where exactly is the northwest sub-area? You'd say, well, it's Costco, Target, it's the original town, it's the marketplace. But
Okay.
yeah, 'cause that's a phrase, that's a term that we've been using in the northwest sub-area and northwest Superior.
I think we
But
coined
is
it.
that
I don't
just
think anybody
residential,
else
or
is
is it
using
commercial
it.
too, or is it
Okay.
both? And it's both. Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
And that was going to be one of my comments. So when you pose these questions, is this on the heels of the presentation and discussion so that people actually know
Yep.
what it's talking about, because that'll help. But, to have, or to even to have a small map of the outline of the area with a couple of the, logos, Target, whatever.
Okay.
So the latter part of the question, how well do the town's current plans and regulations fit with your vision for the Northwest Superior? I don't know if I know the towns. Are there current town plans?
I think that's the question that's begged there, is what are the town's current plans?
Yeah, I don't know
And
that.
that's-
I don't know that any of us know what that. I don't know how we could answer that question exactly like that.
Well, and I think going back to the comp plan, and you guys kind of answered that already of saying, we don't use it for, we don't consider
so you mean
that-
like the comprehensive plan and land use code?
And
Okay.
transportation.
I'd probably spell that out.
So comp plan and transportation
Sure.
plan.
Yeah.
We definitely can spell that out.
Maybe spell that out. Yeah, I just wasn't quite following it.
Yeah.
And actually, when I look at number 2 over there, and even when I approached Stephen about, if we separated the plots in our land, and I'm thinking how confused these poor staff members are as we worry about the multifamily across the street, but yet we talk about wanting to divide our land, right, and put another lot up, or have a carriage house, or an apartment above town, above that, right? And you've got me thinking, right? Because besides the infill that we're facing and the potential to even provide more housing potentially inside of original town along with the multifamily, it's got me thinking about how could we do that multifamily in such a way that it just blends really nicely with some of the things people are wanting to do in Old Town, with dividing lots and splitting things up. And do we keep it single family? Do we use the RCS zoning, right, that we planned? And
There are a lot of tools. But that's
Yeah.
kind of, the first question is, what direction you want to head in, and then what tools, we can tell you what tools, and Darcy's here to tell you what tools
Yeah.
are available to get you there. But, the direction, I think, is kind of the first step.
yeah.
So.
And I think there's the contradiction that you're working with right there. There are some people that want, to fight density tooth and nail. No more people here, period. But then there's also talk about, let's split this lot so that we can put 2 units on that as opposed to 1. And that's the part that's just kind of flipping my brain. There's a huge disconnect for me there that I think is the reason why we asked for you to help with
a lot of
that
pressure
disconnect.
here.
Yeah, no pressure at all. But it's like, it's like
We've got 2 weeks to do
we've got to somehow, we've got to somehow, bring that to a point where it's understandable and that, people in our community can comprehend what we're trying to do, because it flips, and that's the difficult part. And it's particularly for me. I have a hard time with that, because I would like to see us have a goal and us work towards that goal. Excuse me. But it's hard to work towards that goal when it changes frequently, and the ideas around that, the goals change. So that's, if you hadn't noticed that, I just wanted to kind of point that out a little bit.
There's quite a few contradictions we're going to have to work through.
And that might be the easiest way to couch that this is studies necessary, is that there's a lot of, kind of push and pull, there's a lot of competing interests, there's all of these things that we need to have some more direction on, because, or we don't, and then we just kind of see what happens. But I don't think anyone wants to be reactive. I think everybody typically wants to be proactive and have an understanding of what could happen, and then have, some tools or some paths, to take in order to address those, so.
It's the ultimate incongruity of, I want to control how my neighbor uses his house, but I don't want anybody telling me what I can do with mine.
I think it's a little broader. I think it's easy to look at multifamily across the street and see 150 housing units going in, when it probably is only 40, right? But, right, versus taking all the infill in original town, which would also generate 45 or 75 new homes if we allowed this, right? But you're right, you don't see that. It's easy to look at that block and say, oh crap, are they just going to put a bunch of row houses up there that look bad, Because that's what we think. We think it's all going to look horrible, and it's not going to fit, and it's not going to flow, and they're going to go, put Rock Creek in our original town, right? You know, and that is a worry, right? That you know, we get these developments like this that are planned, they have HOAs. What are they going to think of us next door? You know, what are they going to do? You know,
That's one perspective of continuity.
oh yeah,
right?
we're like,
So-
how long's Dan's Junkyard going to get to be there now that Remington Homes has homes backing up to it, right? And how long till they're just really complaining about that?
12 seconds.
Right? Yeah. So it's, I think though, you know, so when these, it's you look at these developments, it's this new development and this new way of developing, and it's but it's the same thing. I mean, it's just I think the line is the new development and what that's going to look like and how we're going to handle it. But yeah.
Well, I think it's going to be, I mean, I think it's not going to be an easy conversation. Obviously, you guys know that already, but I think, you know, there's going to be give and take, and I think we will convey that to the community when we meet with them too, that, you know, this is sort of trying to wrestle with things that you know, can live with and things that you don't think you can live with, and trying to kind of look at all the options, and, you know, not everybody's going to get everything that they want out of a process like this. But at least for the next, you know, few weeks, our job is to listen carefully and try to bring that back to you and provide that balance and frame it up, and we'll see what comes out of this. But there's definitely some challenges, and you know, the only way to kind of walk through that is to kind of look at all the options and see where you guys want to go. So.
Well, thanks so much, Darcy, for the work you guys are putting into this.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to working with you and hearing back from you.
This was very helpful. Are there any other questions, concerns you guys have as we kind of venture out and have a conversation with the community? This has been super helpful.
Can you go back to the process at the very beginning, just real quick?
Actually, we've got a
And the
wrap-up
dates,
slide
right?
that has a little bit more detail here, so, oops. So, yeah, so.
There's an hour and a half meetings?
Mhm.
What do you see them looking like? What do you see that hour and a half looking like, roughly?
So your idea of doing kind of the stations wasn't one we thought about, but I like that idea. I think that might be a way we can kind of work in some of, you know, we can take some of the material we have, potentially, you know, add some framing pieces to that. We can certainly look at that. I think we do
Were
need
you
to have-
structured? Was it unstructured? Was it
I
sit in
think-
the audience and be spoken at, or walk around and talk, or?
You know, I think we were thinking initially of sort of more, you know, we need to kind of walk people through stuff. So there needs to be some sort of overview presentation. I think you guys have provided some clarification on kind of how to frame that better than we did tonight, and we'll do that. But I think having some aspect of, you know, more informal discussions might be helpful. It's going to depend a little bit on how many people we have.
Agreed.
And so, you know, I think the business community, it's probably going to be, you know, a table of people, and that's easier to have a more targeted conversation. The community meetings, frankly, we're going to have to kind of be on our toes a little bit in terms of being prepared for a crowd versus, you know, a smaller group that we can kind of break up. So I think we may want to have options for both. And then if we've got, you know, some of those, you know, an opportunity to kind of have people rove around, we can do that too. But I think we need to at least cover, you know, the basics and kind of a quick presentation to ground people, and then, you know, have time for discussion, most of the time for discussion, so.
So Martin, if I can pick on him over there, we've had a few over the years where I just remember, you know, people who were educated on a particular area were standing around, and people were just coming in. And do you feel like I mean, I liked it. I don't know how well it worked for end result for staff. And do you remember? I mean, do you remember that being a positive experience for the community and for staff, or was it a pain in the butt?
Sure, Martin Toth Town staff. So like Bob's alluding to, we've had a couple of different engagement processes over the year. Over the years, we've had a couple of parks projects here with Founders Park, and also with community parks as part of the Downtown Superior project, and then also everybody's familiar with Eldorado Cave Park, the wildflower park that was built last year. And so we've had some opportunities where people could come in with pieces and think about some of the more traditional kind of charrette exercises, and having stations has been an effective way to do that for both development projects and also for park projects.
So you were able to capture information and meaningful stuff, and
well, we've had some really skilled consultants that were able to capture. That's the key.
Yeah. Okay. All right,
So
cool.
we actually did do.
Thank you.
As part of the comprehensive plan meetings, because we had all of those opportunity areas, we did have stations at some of those meetings too. I think just hearing the conversation tonight, I mean, maybe we can kind of target it towards, different, there's maybe 3 different stations, original town, kind of the business aspects of Northwest Superior. We'll have to think more about that, but I think there is a way that maybe we can kind of dive into some of those, have some of those more in-depth conversations. So we will strategize about that.
So 2 meetings like that, and then a business meeting that you expect
Yes.
to probably be a little smaller.
Yep.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know, our chamber's pretty active, you might get a lot. but-
No, that's great. Yeah, I think Stephen had mentioned for they were super helpful with the TAP study, just getting people to the table. And, certainly if we don't get a good turnout at that, we can follow up by phone with folks that we need to, that, if we miss people,
Yeah.
so.
I think Heather could ask for registration too, so we could get a count, which might be nice.
Do we know, is there a kind of guesstimate on that group so far?
Not yet, but she distributed flyers already to the marketplace business owners, or I guess it's the business owners, and then she'd asked for them to RSVP with her, and then the actual flyer asked for them to RSVP with me. So hopefully they'll listen to one of those two. So she just wants to know that they've got it and see. But there's also the casino night. I was telling Commissioner Malia that the timing of this is pretty good, because the casino night I think is on the 19th. It's a Thursday, and so we'll advertise there too. I don't know how receptive anyone will be to doing a survey or anything like that at that time, but at least we'll get the message out and we'll advertise. So, but she did say that the marketplace folks don't always attend, or they have lower attendance for the casino night. So we're trying to drum that up as well. So,
Great.
Can we get Brixmor in a conversation? Are they addressed? I mean, do they respond if we call them? Do they?
yeah, there's a local contact that we have for Brixmor that is fairly receptive. So,
Whether they come or whether we have a separate conversation because they're so big, but I don't know.
yeah, no, we'll definitely target them just like we did for the TAP study,
Okay.
the folks that we know, and see what happens.
Okay.
The date of November 21st for the presenting the findings, I think that's Thanksgiving week, and all the
that
schools are
Tuesday.
shut down, and like
Okay.
I'm gone that week. I don't know about everyone. We always travel. Yeah, and so it's Tuesday night before. So I just doesn't seem like the best date in my.
Maybe the first week in December or something.
Yeah, the 28th would be fine.
Yeah.
If it was, again, I don't know timing, Stephen.
Yeah,
Maybe it has
no,
to be.
I think originally we were hoping to get done by the end of the year, and we kind of realized that that's probably not
Yeah.
possible due to all the holidays and the fact that the board only meets once in December and all that stuff. So I think we have more time, and we can certainly update the board along the way if we feel like we need to, in order to, if they need an answer previously, as far as the full-fledged study in 2018. So.
Thank you for trying to get it done by the end of the year. What does the questionnaire look like? How does that get developed? I've seen some that were good and some that annoyed me, but
So our intent is to have, kind of whatever questions we land on for the community meeting to be the same questions that we send out. So the challenge is a little bit of the, how do we get across the same level of education and information in the survey, and then kind of ask the same questions. And so actually someone was working today on kind of trying to frame that up, and basically you've got to provide a bit more narrative, a little bit of context to kind of give people the background. Here's a link to more information if you want to look at it, but we'd like to try to keep the questions the same, just so that we're at least kind of getting consistent feedback. So it would be a fairly short list of questions. So kind of going back to some of what we and I think based on the conversation tonight, we'll obviously massage this and kind of flesh it out a little bit more. But do you have specific thoughts on surveys that you have seen that work better than others? That
Oh, I think you nailed it. It's how do they have the education to answer the question, right? That's the hard part. And is there, I don't know how many hours this is going to take you guys to do, but, when I look at, can you summarize some things, I mean, I could see a map of the Northwest sub area with some links on it that just popped up that, well, here's a link to the study for the TOD stuff, and this is your marketplace, and
Yep.
This is Original Town, this is this, and maybe I don't know. That was how do you get people educated before they ask. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and what I don't like is the ones I've seen that I don't like are the ones that give you the answers and you pick from them, and they're guided. They appear to be guided, right?
Sure.
You're sort of trying to guide people in, but this particular study seems like narrative might be better than.
It's I think sometimes it's hard to you worry about having open-ended questions like this, but I think in this case we kind of want that because we want people to feel open to kind of share whatever perspectives they have. There's never a magic to the right questions, but I think certainly not a multiple choice kind of question for this this perspective. So,
cool.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys very much.
We will be meeting next week. So we'll go over 2 plat applications next Tuesday. So they're both related to the town center, but I'll get my head around that and have a staff recommendation to you by the end of the week. So
Is there some possibility that we might scrub that meeting?
no, I was just jaded when I came into the conversation this week, the meeting. So, no, it should be good. But
All right.
a few little minor kinks we still got to work out, but I think we'll have it ready for you.
All right.
That's for next Tuesday.
That's for next Tuesday. Yep. And there's 6 or 8 development applications currently in the works. So it's just there's a lot of work and a lot of stuff coming. But
Well, I'm sorry to abandon everybody, but I probably won't be here next week, so you guys will probably be much more efficient in my absence.
Be sure to give Bob a hard time.
All right. Anything else for the good of the cause? Okay. We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.